Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's session, we'll discuss 7 important articles as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your comprehensive understanding of the current affairs explained to you in the easiest language possible. The topics are as follows. From your analysis section, in the first topic, we'll try to analyze the newly nationally determined contributions which has been announced by the Government of India. Then, in the second topic, we'll try to assess the nutritional aspect as well as the food security prevailing in our country and the challenges thereafter. Then, from your prelims pointer section, we'll take up 5 news. We will not only try to simplify the news for you, but also provide you the much important value addition, which will help you immensely to solve the questions in the prelims examination. So, stay tuned. Where the first article today highlights the prevailing need of climate alarmism. So, there is a concept called as climate alarmism, where certain countries they take pragmatic steps to tackle the issue of increasing global temperature. However, there are other countries also which basically term this entire concept of climate change as nothing but a hoax which has been developed by the scientists. For example, the viewpoint which is held by the great president of USA, that is Donald Trump. However, there are several countries which in reality are actually facing the brunt of increasing global temperature and climate change and its detrimental impact on the flora and fauna across the world. And our country has actually been a flag bearer when it has come to take some pragmatic steps to tackle the issue of climate change and actually save our future demographic dividend to actually face the brunt of this issue. So adding another feather, our government has actually recently announced a nationally determined contribution which has to be achieved by the year of 2035. An important step which forms a very important component of your GS3 paper under the larger theme of environment conservation. So let's first try to develop understanding about the magnitude of the threat of the climate change. And for that purpose, we are actually going to refer to a report. The report is called as Greenhouse Gas Bulletin, which has been released by an organization, World Meteorological Organization. Keep this in mind that for the approaching prelims 2026, World Meteorological Organization also holds of paramount importance. Why? Because very recently, our Indian Navy actually conducted a Meghayan 25 symposium to commemorate the establishment of the World Meteorological Organization in the year of 1950. So according to this greenhouse gas bulletin, let's say for example, there was a global mean temperature in the year of 1850, which was around at that point of a time to be 20 degrees Celsius. So as per the report, from that, now the global temperature has significantly increased by 1.5 degrees Celsius from the pre-industrial level. Don't you think? Because of this increasing global temperature, the sea surface temperature is also going to be significantly increased. So even the heat content of the world ocean was highest in the year of 2024. So the greenhouse gas bulletin actually tells us that how in the year of 2024 there was highest amount of emission of carbon dioxide which took place, approximately 443 particular per meters cube, right? So when there was a highest CO2 emission, why it is such a serious issue? Because carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. Greenhouse gas which basically act as a kind of a blanket to any kind of infrared radiation which is actually emitted by the Earth's surface. So let's say for example, when the sunlight is coming, it is actually ends up heating the Earth's surface. So when the Earth's surface has got heated up, it basically emits infrared radiation. But these greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, they basically act as a kind of a blanket, thus kind of preventing this radiation to actually be escape into the outer space. Thus they end up heating the Earth's surface itself. For example, the heat waves in the region of marine areas has almost covered 32% of the entire ocean surfaces. Now, under this or beneath the ocean, who are living? The marine mammals or the marine, let's say, invertebrates or crustaceans, etc., who has evolved through a millions of years to survive in some small range of temperature. So even if there is a significant increase, right, let's say for example 1.45 degrees Celsius also, it is going to have a kind of a detrimental impact on the marine life, for example, right? Like for example, many of the time you guys read about the coral reef bleaching which has taken place. Don't you think that such increasing temperature will ultimately lead to high scale evaporation, and thus the water which is prevailing in the lakes, ponds, canals, they are going to dry up. The underground water table is going to significantly decline, thus creating the issue of water scarcity, droughts in various regions. Then many of the time you guys might have heard about something called as 4 p.m. rainfall, right? Any guesses where this 4 p.m. rainfall takes place? Majorly in the equatorial region. Why this happens? So in the equatorial region, because there is a kind of a consistent temperature which prevails throughout the year, right? So let's say for example, there is a evaporation which takes place. It rises up, it gets condensed by the afternoon itself, and thus by the evening 4 p.m. there is a kind of a scattered rainfall which takes place. Now when the temperature is rising significantly, even in those regions, even in the temperate region, don't you think that the issue of flash flood is going to significantly increase? And now with the increasing temperature, so let's say for example, when we read about the formation of tropical cyclone, we read that how the sea surface temperature shall be approximately 26 degrees Celsius. So now don't you think with the increasing temperature reaching to this 26 degrees Celsius, which is a kind of an ideal sea surface temperature for the formation of cyclone, it has actually become much more easier. So the intensification of tropical cyclones will take place as well, right? Further, because of the evaporation, the rise in the sea surface temperature which is taking place because the water is expanding, don't you think it is going to have a detrimental impact on the small island states? Even in our country, there are some very important island union territories which we have. So Lakshadweep is there, Andaman and Nicobar is there, Daman and Diu is there. Don't you think the people from there are going to be significantly impacted because of the increase in the sea surface and the encroachment of the land which will take place? So if we refer to another report, that is 6th assessment report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, world is going to breach the Paris Agreement target which was set up in the year of 2015, that we shall try to reduce down or at least curtail this increasing global temperature up to 2 degrees Celsius by the year of 2100. That is something which we can breach with the current level of growth and urbanization within the next 2 decades. Further, temperature is going to rise by 3.1 degrees Celsius by the end of 21st century. And the global mean sea level is going to rise by 1.3 meters. Also, keep one very important thing from the prelims perspective in your mind. This same World Meteorological Organization also releases some another important reports which can be asked by UPSC. State of global climate and the state of climate in Asia, global water resources, airborne dust bulletin, and ozone and UV bulletin. So a suggestion can be that whenever there is a report which is ending with a bulletin, high chances are that it has been released by the World Meteorological Organization. So till now we have understood the detrimental impact of climate change which can actually significantly impact the flora, fauna, humans as well as the economy of the various countries at the global scale. But what about if the question is asking specifically from the Indian perspective? So if we talk about Indian perspective, India's mean surface temperature has actually risen by 1 degree Celsius from the year of 1950. At a certain point of time, there were a lot of people who were indulging in, let's say for example, when they were cooking. So they used to indulge in, let's say for example, biomass firing. Then at that point of a time, there was a large scale use of fossil fuel resources which used to be done. So the government, it basically brought various kind of initiatives, right? So for example, one was the introduction of LPG gases and one was the liberalization, privatization and the globalization reforms which our country brought. But because of these LPG reforms, the second one, it actually led to the large scale urbanization, industrialization in our country. Because of that, in the last 3 decades itself, the average temperature in our country has actually significantly increased by 0.5 degrees Celsius. And thus in the year of 2025, we witnessed 77 heat wave events, which actually spanned across the country for a cumulative total of 536 days. Also, keep this in mind that when this global temperature is rising, it is going to have a significant impact on our economy. Let's try to assess that. So first we'll try to see the overall impact on the energy sector, on the various sectors of economy, and then we'll try to calculate it by taking a case study specifically from the agriculture sector. So first and foremost, when we are saying that we have become the most populous country in the world as per the United Nations World Population Report, and there is a kind of a significant level of urbanization which is taking place. Industrialization is taking place. More number of peoples are actually migrating from the villages to live in the cities. And thus the cities are proliferating. Don't you think that our energy consumption demand is going to significantly increase as well? So now earlier at one point of time, you had one telephone in your entire house, but now you have 3 mobiles for yourself, one tablet, one laptop, correct? So don't you think the energy consumption has significantly increased? Thus, we have become the third largest energy and oil consumer in the world. And with the increasing population and urbanization, our energy demand is actually going to grow further 2.5 times by the year of 2047. And by the year of 2047, the total 100% incremental demand which exists in the world, 1/4 of that will be contributed by our country. So first thing which we can establish is that the energy consumption is obviously significantly going to increase in the future. It is not going to decline for sure. Now, if we are producing this energy from the renewable sources, which is not releasing greenhouse gases, then that is completely fine. But if we look at the current state of production, keep this in mind that we have a total installed power capacity of 495 gigawatt. The coal-based thermal power plants actually contribute to approximately 217 gigawatt. We are talking about the installed power capacity. But from the installed power capacity to the actual power generation, there is a lot of difference. So for example, even today, 71% of the power generation, it comes only from the thermal based power plants or fossil fuels, which actually releases the greenhouse gases. So if we are not going to decarbonize our energy sector with this increasing energy demand, if the majority of that energy is being produced from the fossil fuel, don't you think that the greenhouse gas is actually going to significantly increase? So more carbon emission, more creation of greenhouse gases, more strong blanket being formed, and thus more temperature increase in our country. As the temperature increases, don't you think at one point of time it will become unbearable for us? Anyway, it is now in the month of May and June when the temperature is going up to 50 degrees Celsius. So don't you think our cooling demand will also significantly increase? In the year of 2025, there was a peak cooling demand of 50 gigawatt, right? And by 2030, it is actually going to increase up to 200 gigawatt. Keep this in mind that we still fall in the category of lower middle income country. So right now, only 6% of the households in our country actually use air conditioners. Just imagine that with the increasing, kind of an income level and increasing propensity to consume, what if all of these houses start installing ACs? Many of the people are actually doing that because it has become unbearable. So the cooling demand will significantly increase. And if we are not, kind of contributing that with the renewable energy sector, then it is going to increase further fossil fuel. So that is something which we called as a domino effect, a triple burden of energy, increasing energy consumption, also the need of the, let's say for example, the growth of the country, the development of the country. For that increasing energy consumption, majority of the energy consumption coming from what? Fossil fuel, leading to what? More generation of fossil fuels, right? And thus more warming and increasing cooling demand. Thus, the IPCC says that it is unequivocal that the human interference has warmed up not only the atmosphere, but the ocean, the land, etc. Now, when we have understood this, let's try to assess one more impact on specifically the agriculture sector. The climate vagaries which is taking place. So it's not only about having the conditions of drought or increasing global temperature, but sometimes the climate vagaries is also manifesting itself in the form of unseasonal rainfall, just like for example how you saw in the month of March. So for that, let's take up a case study of Tamil Nadu. What happened in Tamil Nadu in the month of December? So normally rice is grown in Tamil Nadu as a kharif crop, and by the month of October and November the crop has been harvested, right? And it has been, kind of reaped, and the market or the rice has been sold in the market. So how this, kind of the selling takes place? So there is a kind of a decentralized procurement scheme where the state governments, they procure paddy and wheat on the behalf of the center under the public distribution system, right? The cost of procurement and monitoring the quality of food grain is procured, that is done by the union. And this procurement is done on the basis of the minimum support price which is provided by the center. Center just tells to farmer one thing, that make sure that your moisture content is between 17 to 22% only. Now what started happening in the month of December? So even after the withdrawal of the monsoon, there was adequate amount of rainfall which was taking place in the region of Tamil Nadu, thanks to the climate vagaries, because of the climate change. So the farmers, they said कि ठीक है, अच्छी बात है, if there is such a good rainfall, we can actually grow another cycle of rice, and that's what they did, leading to additional production of almost 6 lakh acres which were brought under paddy cultivation. So more paddy was basically kind of produced. But now when this paddy is reaching to the market, the government is saying that first and foremost, the moisture content is very high. Thanks to the high rainfall, we cannot procure it. If they are not procuring it at the MSP, there was a reluctance of the private traders also to buy the paddy. Why? Because there is a kind of a huge surplus which has been created. Even the state government had not created enough direct purchase centers. And now this all excessive surplus of rice which has been generated in Tamil Nadu, because where the farmers were actually trying to make a little bit of extra money, they did not even or was not even able to actually store that because of the lack of storage infrastructure. So basically that led to a huge amount of loss of rice. Thus, don't you think all of these issues is going to have a significant impact on our GDP? For example, even if we do not take any pragmatic step and we keep on growing the way we are growing right now at the current rate, the temperature is going to, if let's say for example assume that the temperature is going to stay below the 2 degrees Celsius and it does not rises beyond that, so we basically have achieved the Paris Agreement target. Even then, by the year of 2050, we are actually going to significantly witness the decline of our GDP by 1.9%. If we go by the current national goal, that is going to be 3.16%. If it is actually going to breach to the kind of the Paris Agreement target, then the loss can be up to 10%. You guys might be wondering that how the increase in the global temperature is directly linked with the kind of the loss of GDP. So let's say for example you were working as a farmer. We have already established there is a kind of a huge evaporation which has taken place in the ponds, lakes, canals, etc. So you do not have efficient irrigation mechanism. The underground water table has significantly declined. The rain is either taking place in the form of flash flood or there is an entire drought kind of a situation. So basically, don't you think that the agriculture productivity or crop yield is significantly going to reduce, thus impacting 46% of our workforce which actually relies on the agriculture sector? So you said, ठीक है, कोई बात नहीं, agriculture sector doesn't seem profitable, I am going to switch and work in industries. When you are going to work in the industries, more number of energy consumption, more release of fossil fuels if you are not switching to the renewable energy. Thus, there is going to be a kind of a huge energy demand which has taken place. And if that is not being, kind of equivalently supplied with energy, don't you think there will be kind of an energy demand supply mismatch will take place? Power outages will take place. You said, ठीक है, कोई बात नहीं, छुट्टी हो गई. You come out of the industry. You said, चलो ठीक है, I will go outside. I will take a, kind of a breath of fresh air. But there the temperature is 45 to 50 degrees Celsius. Don't you think such heat stress is significantly going to lead to decline in the labor productivity, thus significantly impacting the demographic dividend? All of these issues cumulatively, right, plus added with your heat waves, plus added with your, let's say for example, flash floods, is going to significantly reduce the GDP. These are the headlines which we keep on reading. Rising sea surface, monsoon losses crosses 4,000 crore rupees in Himachal Pradesh. Some of you will be like, ठीक, why we are not easily switching to renewable energy then? Because try to understand that. Let's say for example we say that okay, ठीक है, we can entirely switch to solar energy, but for that we need to create large scale solar plants. For that we require, let's say for example, photovoltaic solar panels. To create them we require a large amount of silicon. Do we have enough critical reserves of silicon in our country? Nahi. We are import dependent even for silicon from China. So if we are basically trying to switch immediately to renewable energy, that is not going to take place, because just look here. If you look at a cost comparison per kilowatt hour, the solar generation is only going to be profitable as per coal-based power. So they come at a same amount of money. The cost of input, right, come at the same cost with a fossil fuel-based energy as well as solar energy by the year of 2030 itself. So we cannot immediately switch to renewable energy, right? It is going to be actually, kind of act as a huge cost of burden or huge cost of expenditure for our government. Thus, let's say for example, our government says that yes indeed, we take the responsibility, we want to decarbonize our sectors, but for that we do require a significant amount of funding. Then there are certain developed nations who have been historically responsible to do the industrialization, to release those greenhouse gas emissions, right? And they have reached to a developed position. Thus, an idea started developing that, okay, let's say for example, there are developing nations like India who are working on industrialization, urbanization, providing employment to the large section of their population. So it's very obvious that they cannot immediately switch to renewable energy. The cost is too high. What if the international organizations, they come together, nations, they come together and they start funding these developing nations, provide them funds, right, for the installation of such large scale solar power plants. This was the idea which was discussed in the Paris Agreement 2015. But before that, there were chain of events which actually established this idea of nationally determined contribution. So it basically originates from the Article 11 of the United Nations Framework on Convention on Climate Change, which basically talked about creating a financial mechanism entrusted with a global environment facility. And thus, under the Article 11 of the Kyoto Protocol, there was already an establishment of an adaptation fund, where it was decided that, okay, the developed nations, they will pool certain funds and provide to the developing nations, which they can avail through the national institutions. And they will use these funds to basically install such renewable energy projects to basically kind of curb down the greenhouse gas emission. Then, the Cancun summit, which took place in 2010 in the COP16, a green climate fund was created. For what? For low emission and climate resilient pathways. And the idea was that we can, all these developed nations, they can pool at least $100 billion annually up to the year of 2020. The same idea was discussed in Warsaw 2030, where the countries did not came into kind of an equal table to actually provide these $100 billion annually. But they said, "ठीक है, कोई बात नहीं, we can at least create a loss and damage fund." So let's say, for example, because of the climate change, there is a huge cyclone which completely devastates the economy of India. So it's fine. These developed nations will basically provide some funding for irreversible damage which has been caused. Ultimately, under the Paris Agreement Article 9, there was a new collective quantified goal which was discussed, which will be set by each countries individually. And to achieve that, these developed nations, Annex 1 countries, USA, China, etc., they will basically provide $100 billion annually. That was something which was discussed. And now, let's say for example, if our government wants funding from this pool of $100 billion, then our government will set up a nationally determined contribution target. So under Article 4, every country shall prepare indices to limit the global warming up to 2 degrees by 2100. Article 3 basically says that each country shall showcase the progression than the previous one. So that's why we have updated for the next 5 years from 2030 to 2035. Article 13 says that each and every country shall report their progress on the NDCs every 5 years, thus creating a kind of an accountability mechanism. Thus, following this guideline, India has announced a new nationally determined contribution for the year of 2030 to 2035. Before that, it was till the year of 2030 only. Okay. Today's article specifically deals with the newly updated targets and what are the challenges which we are going to actually face if we want to achieve that. First, what was the target before and what is the new target? So earlier we said that we are going to reduce our carbon emission intensity of GDP growth by 45%. So let's say for example, the government is going to launch a new highway. So for the construction of this new highway, this new development project, the government will try to ensure that at least 45 to 50% of the total construction actually takes place through the green mechanism or green methods. Till now, we have already achieved decarbonization of at least 36% of our industrial sector by 2025. New target sets up a more ambitious target that by the year of 2035, from the level of 2005, we are going to reduce our carbon intensity of the GDP growth by 47%. But the article suggests that let's say for example, if you are talking about the thermal power production, as we saw, we are majorly dependent on the fossil fuel. Very recently, we were talking about, let's say, the adoption of electronic vehicles. And we read that how the electronic vehicles penetration in our country is still less than 10%. So 90% vehicles are running on what? Petrol and diesel. They are basically emitting what? The greenhouse gas. So it's not very easy for us to entirely switch and achieve this target of reducing the carbon intensity of our GDP by 47% from the 2005 level. Second target is 50% of the installed capacity will actually come from non-fossil fuel power. That was the earlier target, right? Currently, keep this in mind, we have already achieved this target almost 4 years in advance. So currently the installed power capacity, 52% of that actually comes from non-fossil. But keep this in mind, as we have discussed, the installed power capacity does not directly translate to the overall power generation. So if we talk about the generational power capacity of renewable energy, which is coming from wind, solar, hydrogen, nuclear, that is only approximately over 20%. But we have decided that we have already reached to the level of 52.5% of the installed power capacity which is coming from these renewable energy resources. We are going to further increase it to 60% by the year of 2035. Then our country said that, you know what, we had taken a target in the National Forest Policy 1988 that almost 1/3 of our land is going to be under forest and tree cover. Thus the idea was that by the year of 2030, from the level of 2005, the government is going to add 2.5 to 3 billion additional tons of carbon dioxide, carbon sink, by creating more forest, creating more green spaces. Till today, we have current carbon sink which exists in our country from the forest is only 2.2 billion tons of carbon dioxide. We have set up almost a double target to be achieved in the next decade, that by the year of 2035, we will add 3.5 to 4 billion tons of carbon dioxide sequestration in our country. However, if we refer to the recent Indian State of Forest Report 2023, India's total forest and tree cover is only less than 1/4 of the total geographical area. Just look at the headlines, how India has lost 18 times more forest than it gained between 2015 to 2019, right? Yes, we have surpassed the 500 gigawatt and renewable generation exceeds 50% of the demand. But there is still a lot of hurdles and issues which prevails in our ways. More importantly, when we are actually trying to switch to hydrogen energy, nuclear power plants, installation of, let's say for example, rooftop solar panels, we require funds, and this was something which was promised to us under Article 9 of the Paris Agreement. However, when these developing nations are demanding that, there takes place a kind of a huge tussle to actually secure this funding from the developed nations. First and foremost, the have-nots, the countries, the global south, basically the underdeveloped regions, they are asking for financial help for adoption of the greener technologies. So our argument is that it will require high expenditure or energy infrastructure, but that can actually significantly dent our fiscal health. So if the government will keep on creating such renewable energy projects, don't you think that the target which it has set for itself, that by the year of 2026-7 we are going to reduce down our fiscal deficit to 4.4%, we will not be able to achieve it. So the crowding in effect which is being brought by the government to the private industries, that will not take place. So yes, indeed, this finance is going to act as a critical component of accelerating the adoption of the cleaner technologies. So for example, if I want to create, let's say, a green hydrogen plant, I want a huge electrolyzers to actually convert the water into the green hydrogen, but for that purpose, I do require a huge investment. Sometimes such investment is actually being offered by the developed countries, let's say for example China, but not in the form of grants, rather in the form of loans, and thus creating the debt traps. So very recently there was a report by the UNCTAD which made an estimation that how for such green energy transition, these developing nations, the global south, the African continent, the South Asian continent, they basically require a funding of approximately 5.8 to 13.6 trillion dollar. And this was the demand which was raised by the developing nations in the COP30 as well, where we said that okay, at least start providing 1.3 trillion dollar per year by the year 2035 to actually meet the targets of Paris Agreement which we have set on ourselves. But the offer which was made by the developed nation was 300 billion dollar a year. Even though these developed nations, these G7 countries, they actually amount for almost 82% of the carbon budget. For example, just to give you a context, USA is the second largest greenhouse gas emitter, And it is projected that by between the year of 2025 to 2029, USA is going to produce additional 4 billion tons of CO2. Also, the irony dies its own death. USA under Donald Trump has also withdrawn from the Paris Agreement. So all these targets which you are seeing here, it is not applicable on USA. ठीक है? That's why a great person said, hypocrisy की भी सीमा होती है. So what are the steps which has been taken by our government? We are basically putting impetus on the more solar rooftop panel installations. We are actually trying to, kind of put renewable energy even in the irrigation sector. So for rooftop solar panel installation, there is Surya Ghar Muft Bijli Yojana. For actually, kind of electrify the pumps with solar energy, we have brought Pradhan Mantri Kusum Yojana. Under National Green Hydrogen Mission, we have set up for ourselves an ambitious target to produce 5 million metric ton of green hydrogen by the year of 2030 itself. We have also joined the Global Biofuel Alliance to actually kind of create, kind of energy from the West. In our country, we are basically working upon the Gobar Dhan scheme to actually release energy from the various kind of agricultural residue. So there are these innovative steps which the government is emphasizing upon. And recently in the budget, the government also basically proposed and further enacted the Shanti Act 2025, where we are saying that by the year of 2047, 100 gigawatt of energy will come from the nuclear sector itself. In your conclusion, you guys can write about the various steps for urban afforestation which can be taken, innovative methods like, for example, Miyawaki method, creation of more green and blue spaces to actually decrease the heat island effect. And then you can talk about the concept of high performance buildings, taking up the model of Singapore to actually implement in our country as well. And that will further reduce the energy demand also, especially in the urban areas. Try to attempt this particular question and we move forward to the next news, where the article highlights that how, despite the existence of various food security initiatives in our country and the nutritional measures which has been taken by the government of India, the India's demographic dividend faces the issue of malnutrition and food scarcity, issue which forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the larger theme of buffer stock and food security. So let's first try to assess that what do we mean by nutrition in our country. Let's say, for example, a nutritious diet basically involves a balanced diet which basically contains of a lot of vitamins, minerals, fat, good amount of protein, etc. Something which is prerequisite for a person's overall growth as well as to provide this person an adequate amount of energy for day-to-day functioning. Let's assume that there is one such woman, a woman which is not taking or does not have access to such nutritious diet, such balanced diet, and thus she is basically lacking or facing iron deficiency or vitamin B12 deficiency, because of which in her body there is a lesser number of red blood cells, or she is basically facing the issue of having lesser hemoglobin. Keep this in mind that it is the hemoglobin which basically act as the oxygen carrying protein in the red blood cell. So because of this issue of lesser hemoglobin or lesser amount of red blood cell, this woman's organ is not getting enough amount of oxygen content or fuel for the effective functioning. Now let's assume that this woman, she basically ends up getting pregnant. Don't you think that this woman is actually going to either have a miscarriage or the child which is going to have is actually going to face bad health, right? So these are the issues. So this lesser number of red blood cells or hemoglobin in the body caused by what? Caused by the poor nutrition is the issue of anemia. And as per the National Family Health Survey 5's data, almost 57, more than half of the women in our country aged between the age of 15 to 49 years are actually anemic, facing this issue of lesser hemoglobin. And when these women, when they are getting pregnant, or for example, even when, for example, when they are participating in the labor force participation rate, they actually faces a lot of hurdles. For example, as per the recent reports, even today, our country's maternal mortality ratio is 93 per 1 lakh women, which basically translates to that while, let's say, for example, there were 1 lakh women who were pregnant, 93 of them succumbed to death while giving birth to the demographic development of the country. As per UNICEF, almost 2 by 3rd, more than 66% of under 5 years death which occurs, it occurs due to malnutrition. And our country, India, it accounts for 1 by 3rd of the wasted children globally. So if we refer to the data which has been provided to us by the National Family Health Survey 5 for the year of 21-23, it tells us about the prevailing issue of chronic malnutrition or acute malnutrition which is lying in our country. For that, we are basically going to put our survey on the under 5 years of children, out of which 35% of them are basically facing the issue of stunting, or they have low height for their age, or 19% of children are actually facing acute malnutrition where they are wasted or they have low weight for their height. Almost 32% of the children under the age of 5 years are facing the issue of underweight where they have low weight for their age. So this basically translates to that these people, right, this demographic dividend of our country in the future, they are not being fed nutritious diet, and thus from the childhood itself they are actually going to fall in the bracket of facing various kind of diseases, being underdeveloped. Their intellectual capability will not transform, their horizons of thinking will not expand up to that level, they will not have that much of a physical capability. So don't you think this one small issue of nutrition is actually going to have a detrimental impact on our country's overall economic output as well in the future? Also, what are the causes? Why such malnutrition prevails in our country? So if we refer to the Global Hunger Index 2025, which has ranked our country at 102 out of 123 countries, the major problem is the intergenerational cycle of malnutrition, where the people, right, the father, the mother who are bearing these children, they themselves are underfed. They themselves are facing this issue of chronic malnutrition. Why? Because of the issue of the prevailing poverty and food insecurity in our country. So first and foremost, majority of the time what happens that we put impetus when it comes to diet. The first thing which comes in our mind is staple crop. Take staple crops like, let's say for example, pulses, rice, wheat, etc. And if someone is having that on their table, we basically consider or automatically believe that this person is having a nutritious diet. But that is not the case. So for example, many of the people even do not have access to these staple crops itself. Like for example, if we refer to the Economic Survey 2026, 5.3% of the population in our country, they basically falls in the category of extremely poor, where a whole family might be surviving on the daily wages of 300 to 500 rupees. So they cannot even sustain, let's say for example, 3 meals a day, right? Now imagine such a kid who is not having 3 meals a day, that too in the most formative phase of his entire life. Don't you think he will not be able to develop that much of a cognitive skills in comparison to other people? Then these poor people, they majorly or heavily rely on the public distribution system. That is another issue. Because in public distribution system, the government is only providing the staple crops. It is providing you rice, millets, wheat, pulses, but it is not providing you other kind of nutritious diet, enough sources of protein, let's say for example, or vitamins for example. This basically translates into the issue of hidden hunger, where a large section of the children in our country, they actually face the issue of micronutrient deficiency, and that is further exacerbated by the poor sanitation, hygiene and the disease burden. Now when we are talking about this issue of, let's say for example, the poverty-led issue of malnutrition, keep this in mind that if we refer to the data which was given to us by the India Today's group research, it tells us that how 3 in every 4 Indians cannot afford a healthy food. And if we talk about the percentage of the people who are unable to afford such healthy food, in China it was approximately 11%, at global scale it was 42%, but in our country it was up to 74%. The major reason according to that report published by the published by the India Today, was the prevailing poverty, where a large section of people have the low income. So if we refer, keep this in mind, India has the lowest per capita GDP among the BRICS nation. Just look at here. The data is up to 2028. If we are calculating it on the level of nominal GDP per capita at the purchasing power parity. So let's say for example, there is a person, he is having a meager earning of 100 rupees, right? If we refer to the Household Consumption Expenditure Survey of 2024, the monthly per capita expenditure, right? Approximately 46% of that in rural areas and 39% of that, of the total monthly per capita expenditure, let's say that is 100 rupees, 46 rupees of that in the rural areas actually is being spent on the food by the people, right? So first and foremost, a large section of the income is actually going to food itself. Obviously, they are unable to afford, let's say for example, 20 eggs a day, to have avocado, or to have, let's say for example, coconut water 3 times a day. They cannot afford it. Then they are remaining with, let's say, 54 rupees. Out of this 54 rupees, now because they are suffering from this hidden hunger issues, like for example, poor sanitation, hygiene, disease burden, etc. So that is further costing them a high out of pocket expenditure. Let's say as per World Bank, it is more than 40%. So another 20 rupees is gone. Now this person is left with 34 rupees. For what? To provide education to his children, to pay the house rent, to provide for various kind of work related expenditures. Do these people have any savings at all? Obviously not. So the government said that, okay, koi baat nahi. Let's say for example, if you are unable to provide the good nutrition to your children, and they are going to be the demographic dividend of our country, our nation's future growth lies on these pillars, strong pillars. So we are going to basically launch various nutritional programs. Like for example, we'll make sure that such identification of such houses is being done by Anganwadi workers. They are providing you, let's say for example, ration to such pregnant and lactating mothers. But even this implementation does not take place in its most adequate structure. Then the government launched basically midday meal scheme, which has now been the part of the Poshan scheme, where the government said that we are basically going to ensure a certain level of calorie intake, ensuring that various kind of nutrients are being provided to the children in the school from class 1st till class 8th. And this is basically a centrally sponsored scheme. But even then, midday meal scheme is not implemented, right? Why? Because of the lack of real-time monitoring. So let's say these meals are being provided infrequently 3 to 4 days a week. Even on the days, the kind of the allotted ration quota is not being fulfilled by the people at the grassroots level. Another important reason is the prevailing gender inequality. So remember that in the Global Gender Gap Report, which is released by the World Economic Forum, our country ranked at 131. These indices are very important for your prelims examination also. So if we refer to the periodic labor force survey, the total number of women who are working in the labor force is only 35%. So there are 65% of the women who are entirely dependent on their male counterpart, right? So when we are saying that, okay, they are entirely dependent on their male counterpart, many of the time, because of the lack of financial independence which they have, right, they are unable to invest in the good nutrition of their children. And this was an experiment which was actually conducted in the region of Kenya, where the people were actually provided with a good amount of, the women there were provided with a good amount of financial security. And these women, the first step which they took was for the well-being of their children. So the lack of financial independence or dependence is also a very major issue. Okay? When we have understood these issues, one major thing is that there is a large scale food security scheme which is running by the government of India, that is public distribution system, where the government is saying that, you know what, we are going to provide you subsidized ration, correct? Now what are the issues which basically prevails in the public distribution system? So remember that public distribution system is a very important social security scheme which functions under the Ministry of Consumer Affairs, Food and Public Distribution. To achieve what? To achieve the objective of the National Food Security Act of 2013, under which the government has basically promised that we are going to provide subsidized ration to almost 75% of the rural population and 50% of the urban population, totaling to approximately 91 crore people in our country. So yes, indeed, they are directed by the Article 38 that we are a welfare state and we are responsible, the government is responsible for the welfare of the people as well as their adequate development. But the National Food Security Act 2013 basically translates this welfare-based scheme into almost a legal right, where the government is saying that, see, first and foremost, we are going to identify under the socio-economic caste census of 2011 or the below poverty line people, and then we are going to provide them subsidized ration. So let's say for example, rice will be provided to you, rupees 3 per kg. Wheat will be provided to you, rupees 2 per kg. Or any kind of coarse cereals like for example millets is going to be provided you at a very cheap cost of 1 rupees per kg. How these beneficiaries are going to be identified? So there are 3 different categories. All of these beneficiaries, keep this in mind, is identified by the state government. So first and foremost, there are priority households, which are basically being identified on the basis of socioeconomic caste census or below poverty line people, etc. The central government has only given certain directives to the state government that make sure that if there is a person who is a government employee, or let's say who is paying income tax, or if there is certain amount of land that person is being possessed, which can be defined by the state government, then these people shall not be considered as the eligible beneficiaries. So these priority households will get 5 kg of food grain per month to kind of avail or ensure a basic level of food security. Second, the households which basically falls under Antyodaya Yojana, which basically includes the landless agriculture laborers, marginal farmers, rural artisans, slum dwellers, and the persons who are earning their livelihood on daily basis. These people will get 35 kg food grain per month. Then the government is also ensuring food security to the pregnant women, right, as well as the children in their most formative phase of development from age 6 months to 14 years. So for them, there is a free nutritious meals which are being provided through the integrated child development as well as the Poshan scheme. So when we have understood how the public distribution system basically functions, let's try to understand the various issues which prevails in PDS, which obviously translates ultimately to the large section of people actually facing the issue of acute and chronic malnutrition. First and foremost is the inclusion error itself, the leakage and the diversion which takes place of the food grain. So for example, many of the time what happens that there are a lot of intermediaries. These intermediaries, they basically create ghost cards, and on those ghost cards they basically avail such subsidized food, and then they ultimately, instead of the subsidized food reaching to the eligible beneficiary, this subsidized food is actually diverted to the various market sellers who actually sell it at the MRP to actually make more profit. How these ghost cards are created? So let's say for example, one person has got an Aadhaar card, and that Aadhaar card has been registered for as an eligible beneficiary for public distribution system. So on that one Aadhaar card, various such accounts are actually opened. Creation of the various ghost ID cards. Or let's say there was a person who was enrolled in the public distribution system, but that person basically succumbed to an untimely death. So now this person's ID card of ration card is actually being utilized to avail the kind of the subsidized food under public distribution system. If you want to understand about the proliferation of such ghost ID cards, just look at this headline, that how Uttar Pradesh actually weeded out the highest number of cards, that was 72 lakhs. So there existed 72 lakh ghost ID cards who were actually getting these free and subsidized ration. And this is something which the government is actually now trying to implement under the targeted public distribution system order which they brought, right? Second, the policy blindness leads to the exclusion errors itself. So for example, if let's say for example I want to avail the public distribution system which is being charged on the Consolidated Fund of India, I shall be mandatorily possessing an Aadhaar card. But in Aadhaar card, let's say for example, there is a biometric authentication. If this biometric authentication fails, then I would not be given those 5 kgs of rice. Or let's say these Anganwadi workers who are actually traveling to the village area. So they are basically going to provide, let's say, these free and nutritious meals to the pregnant woman. But for that, they require an online registration. Now, I am working as an Anganwadi worker. I went to that village. The network signal is not only there. So now her name is not being registered. Okay. She is scolding me only. These are the real issues which actually takes place. The policy blindness leading to the exclusion errors. Just look here, an estimated 2.8 crore people may have been left out of the public distribution system in UP itself because of these various exclusion errors which actually takes place. Then, as per the Comptroller and Auditor General's report, there exists inadequate storage capacity in our country. So while we are talking about that, how let's say for example we have become the largest producer and exporter of rice in the world, at the same point of time we are also ranking 102nd in the global hunger index. Does it make sense? Yes, it does. Now look at this table. So just look at the increase in the food grain production year after year. There has been a consistent increase after 2020. However, just look at the storage capacity with the Food Corporation of India. That has also significantly and consistently declined in the last few years. Why? Because of the diversion of these various kind of storage channels. Either because they kind of succumb to the growing wave of urbanization, or these storage channels were actually diverted to, let's say, some public sector unit, or they were actually brought by some private entities. So because of this disinvestment exercises by the government of India, they have actually run out of the storage capacity to actually store this continuous supply which is taking place of the food grain. The continuous supply also is a problem. Why? Because of the open-ended procurement system. So for example, the government is saying that, okay, to the farmers, that if this price is not ensured by the market to you, the bare minimum price, we are going to procure it. And thus government keeps on procuring this rice, wheat, pulses, even if there does not exist any demand. So there is a demand supply mismatch which takes place, right? So the government keeps on procuring, does not have adequate amount of storage system, right? Don't you think that is actually going to lead to a huge leakage and the wastage of the products? Just look here, the food grain storage losses in India. It was approximately 291.95 million tons. 4 to 6% annual loss of sales takes place. Why? Because of the surplus stock exceeds the storage capacity, because of the uses of improper storage methods. So for example, we are living in 2026, while other countries are having such an advanced level of kind of the food processing industries. We still, many of the times, the public distribution system, if you actually go into the villages and tehsil, you will see that how large scale food grain is actually being stored under plinth coverage, right? Only a tarpaulin has been covered. So there is a kind of a disease which is taking place. It is getting impacted by the rain moisture. There is a kind of a pest attack which is taking place. Huge amount of food grain losses. This also further gets exacerbated. Why? Because of the FIFO principle, first in, first out principle. So there is a kind of a old stock which is actually, kind of lying and rotting for years, non-liquidation of older stocks. And then even when you're talking about the procurement policy, a large scale procurement actually takes place from the green revolution built states. Then there are a lot of other states who are actually cultivating rice, but that is not being procured, and you guys just saw that with the example of Tamil Nadu, the case study which we studied. So because of these issues which prevails in public distribution system, the exclusion of the eligible beneficiaries, this is also basically creating another hurdle when it comes to the nutritional aspect. That is why the editorial, it actually suggests some innovative suggestions. It tells us that first and foremost, when we talk about the 0 to 5% fructile, right? So these are basically the people who are having the least amount of money with them, who are actually suffering with acute malnutrition, who does not have any resources for their food security at all. We actually, kind of try to target this 0 to 5% fructile. And we can actually raise the subsidy, the amount of food grain which we are giving for this lower fructile. But then even the people who are getting out of this 91 crore people, there might be certain 15 to 20 crore people who have now jumped the economic line, who might have, let's say for example, moved to a certain position where they can afford the food grain. So there is a kind of a mechanism which we need to apply to actually kind of eliminate them as well. Then to this lower fructile, we shall actually target to provide more nutrition, to provide them various kind of pulses, to provide them various kind of millets, fruits, vegetables. And we can also lead to equalization of the primary consumption among all the fructiles. You guys can also inculcate the Shanta Kumar panel suggestion to improve the Food Corporation of India's operational efficiency and financial management, to actually amend the National Food Security 2013 to reduce the beneficiaries from 66% of the population to 40%. But then we can target these 40% who are in the dire need of food security, to actually raise the supply for this 40% to 7 kg per person from current 5 kg. We can also diversify the procurement by focusing on other regions like, for example, East and Northeast India, as well as focus on the competitive grain supply within the states instead of just relying on this open-ended procurement. So remember these suggestions, try to attempt this question, and we move forward to the next news, where we'll quickly try to learn about the first World Buddhist Peace Conference which took place where? So Hyderabad in Telangana, it actually hosted the inaugural session, the first session of the World Buddhist Peace Conference, thus bringing together the ministers, monks, scholars and delegates from over 20 countries in a bid to advance dialogue on peace, reconciliation and ethical leadership, thus positioning Telangana as a center for Buddhist heritage, diplomacy and peace building. The summit actually themed around the Buddhist approaches to the conflict resolution, the Madhyamika Marg, reconciliation and healing, seeks to move beyond the abstract calls for peace and instead emphasize on inner transformation, which ultimately led to the attainment of nirvana by Gautam Buddha, ethical values and sustained dialogue as the foundation for harmony. So just a quick recall for all of you to understand the Buddha's attainment of nirvana and the inner purification journey which he went through. There is a Buddhist text called as Brahmjal Sut. Brahmjal Sut basically forms the part of a text called as Digh Nikaya, and Digh Nikaya basically forms the ultimate part of the canonical text called as Sut Pitaka. Sut Pitaka is that text which consists the original sayings of Gautam Buddha. So according to Brahmjal Sut, Gautam Buddha is himself saying, this contains the saying of Gautam Buddha, that there existed 62 schools of philosophies in the world at that point of a time. Okay? Samakhya, Nyaya, Yoga, and all of these philosophical schools. And they were basically, at that point of a time, were fighting among each other, right? Where they used to fight. So these philosophical debates used to take place at a certain place called as Kutagrashala. Okay? Out of this 62 school of philosophy, one such school of philosophy was Shraman tradition. Shraman tradition, which basically ended up rejecting the Vedic tradition. So Vedic tradition, which was basically focused upon, let's say, various kind of rituals, sacrifices, or let's say it used to talk about the supremacy of the priesthood, where priest was basically required to perform various kind of yajnas and sacrifices. Shraman tradition basically rejected this idea. Shraman tradition said ki nahi. If I want liberation, I am going to leave the materialistic world. I am not going to rely on any external authority. I will become a sannyasi. I will go to the forest and mountains. I will bear the hardship. I will do shram by my own self for my own liberation to attain moksha, swarg, nirvana, etc. So basically, Shraman tradition acted as a kind of an antithesis to the Vedic tradition, right? तो बेसिकली बुद्ध ने क्या किया, पूजा को रिजेक्ट कर दिया, ठीक, लेकिन नहीं, हमें ऐसा नहीं करना है, पूजा करना अच्छी बात होती है, ठीक. Now Shraman tradition, one such Shraman tradition is Buddhism which was founded by which person? Siddhartha Gautam. Siddhartha Gautam, who was born at a place called as Lumbini in Nepal. हमें कैसे पता? अशोका ने बताया, the Mauryan ruler who ruled from 268 to 232 BC. He basically, kind of erected an inscription called as Rummendei pillar inscription at Lumbini. He says that Shakya Muni was born here itself. Shakya, why? Because Siddhartha Gautam belonged to a clan. The name of that clan was Shakya clan. And he was basically born to a king called as Sudhodana. So when Siddhartha Gautam was born, a great monk came. The name of the monk was Atisa. Atisa basically saw Gautam Buddha and he said that, okay, either this small child is going to become the greatest king in the future or the greatest monk. So Sudhodhan basically ensured that how there is a kind of a sheltering of Gautam Buddha with all the opulence of wealth in the world. So he never leaves the palace itself. However, at the age of 29 years, Gautam Buddha basically left the palace, wandered into the outside world for the first time and saw 4 visuals called as Chatro Mahanimitta. 4 visuals which basically changed his perspective towards the entire world. He basically saw an old man, a person who was suffering from a disease, a dead body, and a person who had become a monk. And thus he also felt a samvega or an inner spiritual urgency to kind of provide solution to these worldly affairs or problems. And thus he left his palace entirely. This event is termed as Mahabhinish Kraman. And what he became? He became a pravajaka or a wanderer. So at the age of 29 years, he left. Then he wandered for 6 years and ultimately reached to a place at that point of a time called as Uruvela, modern day Bodh Gaya, at the bank of a river called as Phagun river, where he sat down and he meditated for the next 49 days. And ultimately, what he got nirvana, enlightenment, where he realized Arya Sachani or 4 noble truths. Sabbam Dukkham, All of us are sad. What is the reason of this dukh? Is samuday or the world? The world which basically instill among us what? Desire or trishna or maya. How these desires basically emerge from something called as skandhas. So there are 5 skandhas through which you go through the process of 5 skandhas and you start developing attachment to any object, to any examination, to any person. Because of that, you will always remain sad. And thus, is there a nirodh or is there a solution? Yes, indeed. And that was Ashtangika Marg, which was propounded by Gautam Buddha. Ashtangika Marg, which also consists of 3 pillars: the Prajna, the Shila, and the Samadhi. Right? So when he got this enlightenment, nirvana, Gautam Buddha got, the fear of missing out. He got a FOMO. He was like, I want to tell something about this. So he went into the search of those 5 monks who had earlier deserted him. Right? So he basically went and find him at a place now called, at that point of a time, called as Rishi Patna, modern day Sarnath, at a park called as Mrigdaya, or a deer park. So the place where he finds them, there is a stupa called as Chaukanti Stupa, built by Ashoka, right? And then he convinced them just 80 meters away to sit and listen to his sayings and his teachings. So these 5 monks, they basically sat down, and Gautam Buddha gave his first sermon where he told them about Arya Sachani and Ashtangika Marg. These first 5 followers were Kaundinya, Bhadrika, Vashpa, Ashwajit, and Mahanaman. And the moment Gautam Buddha gave this sermon, the wheel of law changed from earlier Vedic tradition to now Shraman tradition. This event is called as Dharm Chakra Parvartana. And at the place where Gautam Buddha gave this first sermon was your Dhamik Stupa. Okay? So I hope the stupas will be, in your mind as well. Okay? Isko yaad rakhiyega. है ना? Because the article is talking about the inner purification. What were the important teachings of Gautam Buddha? First was Patika Samupada, or law of causation. Everything, every action which you do is dependent on some or other action, and you cannot control all of them. Okay? So for example, you are watching the Analyst, you are making notes out of it, and you are noting down all the important points. Okay? But is there a guarantee that 100 questions will come from here only? Nahi. Right? Patika Samupada, law of causation. So the moment you start realizing that I cannot control everything, right? I cannot solve all 100 questions with 100 accuracy. Then you start realizing that, okay, everything, every feeling is nothing but temporary. Anik. Anik is nothing but a Pali term for a Hindi term called as Chanik. Okay? Everything is temporary. So I cannot control everything. And every feeling, every person, every examination is nothing but a temporary phase in your life. If it is true, then you start developing a larger consciousness that how you feel is not important. How you make other person feel is more important. And thus you develop something called as compassion and empathy. When you start looking at the life from the other people's perspective, you start thinking about their grievances. And thus now your consciousness does not lie in you, rather in each and every person through which you are connected, and that is called as Anat, right? So law of causation, law of impermanence, and ultimately the law of consciousness. Okay? So this was the inner purification about which Gautam Buddha talked about. Now when we talk about the specific prominence of the region of Telangana and Hyderabad, as well as the larger Andhra Pradesh, right, for the Buddhism, it is very important to look at these specific inscriptions and stupas which were created by Ashoka in this region. For example, Amravati, Yeragudi, Joguda, right, very important ones. So when Gautam Buddha died in the year of 483 BC, on his death he died in Kushinagar. So Mallas of Kushinagar, they basically burnt him and they got those ashes, okay, and they created a stupa on that. So originally 8 Sharirik stupas were created. Okay. Ashoka ended up fighting a battle called as Battle of Kaling and committed a genocide. Then he got all sad. He was like, ye maine kya kar diya? So he met a Buddhist monk who was a merchant also, named as Samudra. It was Samudra who basically brought Ashoka into the fourfold of Buddhism and said that if you want to wash your sin, end up creating as many number of stupas as many people you have killed. And thus Ashoka was in the root of that. He was about to create he had already created 84,000 stupas, which eventually became the place of veneration, right? Where you can actually see in the stupa architecture the symbolic depiction of Buddha as well as the Jataka stories. Jataka stories are nothing but the stories of the previous birth of Gautam Buddha. Like for example, in Matang Jataka, Gautam Buddha was an untouchable person. He went to the market and he faced humiliation. That's why he decided that in my Sangh, which I will create in the future, there will not exist any Varna system. Matang Jataka. Right? So these are the previous birth stories of Gautam Buddha. Coming to very important stupas in the region of your Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. One is Amravati. Amravati's ancient name was Dhanyakataka, also asked by UPSC, the capital of Satvahana dynasty. Here there was a Mahachaitya which was built by Ashoka. And just like Sachi, Amravati also has a unique feature, that is the Pradakshina Path is enclosed within the Vedika or a boundary. And the Vedika panels tells us about the Jataka tales. It was also visited by Zhuanzang. Then in Nagarjuna Konda, which was also patronized by the Satavahanas as well as the Ikshvaku dynasty, you actually see a very characteristic feature, which is the Aika pillars. Now you see how easily you can understand if you know the story. Aika pillars contains 5 pillars, right? Standing on a kind of a round circle. So circle depicts what? Dharma Chakra Parvartana, turning of the wheel of the law. And these 5 pillars, standing at a kind of a monolithic level, they are nothing but the 5 important events of Gautam Buddha. His birth, Mahabhinishkraman, attainment of enlightenment, that is Nirvana. Then the first sermon, Dharma Chakra Parvartana, and ultimately his death, that is Mahapari Nirvana. Keep this in your mind and you move forward to the next news, where we'll quickly try to dissect and understand the Olympics. Some important facts for Olympics, if UPSC ask about it. Why? Because the International Olympic Committee has limited the participation in the Olympic women sports to only biological females, thus excluding the transgender and intersex people among others. According to the International Olympic Committee, its rationale was ensuring fairness, safety and integrity in the elite competition and the protection of the female category. The policy is going to be applied from the 2028 Olympics, which is going to take place where? In USA. Okay. If you look at the history of Olympics, it was basically first, it is considered in the Greek legends that the Greek god Zeus. Zeus had a son Heracles. So it was Heracles who for the first time actually started this event, where he participated in 12 different kind of activities to impress his father about his own strength. The first such mention of such a sport or a competition taking place actually comes from an inscription at Olympia in Greece, where there was a kind of a race which used to be conducted every 4 years. It was officially conducted for the first time by a Roman king in the year of 394 CE. The name of the king was Theodosius I. Ultimately, this sport, which basically lost the patronage because of the decline of the Roman Empire which took place, ultimately the French educator Pierre de Coubertin actually led to the creation of an International Olympic Committee in the year of 1894. The idea was that, okay, there are different countries in the region of Europe. Let's try to promote harmony among them through inculcation of the sports, where each and every country participates. And that led to the conducting of the first Summer Olympics in Athens in 1896. And the first Winter Olympics was conducted in France in the year of 1924. Keep this in mind, that the Olympic flag has 5 interlocking rings, which basically symbolizes the 5 continents in the world linked together in the friendship. Australia, Asia, Africa, Europe, America. The question of the day is, among these 5, which is the largest continent? What is the motto of Olympics? It is CTS, LTS and 4TS, or faster, higher and stronger. Here you can see Pierre de Coubertin, which basically created the International Olympic Committee. So what about India? India under the British rule participated for the first time in the year of 1900. Who was the first Asian to win medals in the Olympics? Norman Pritchard. Who was the first Asian athlete to win gold medal very recently? Neeraj Chopra. How many medals has been won by our country till now? 41. In the last conducted Olympics, we basically won 6 medals. Total is 41. The highest, if it has gone to any sport, is Indian hockey, which has won 13 medals. The first individual medal for our country was actually secured by a person called as K.D. Jadhav in the year of 1952, where he participated in the event of wrestling. These are some very important, if UPSC wants to create statements on Olympics, considering it is going to take place, it is going to ask on these lines. For example, it will ask you, who is the first Indian woman to win an Olympic medal? That is going to be Karnam Malleshwari. Or which person basically won India's first Olympic medal in shooting? Rajvardhan Singh Rathore. Or who was the first individual Olympic gold medalist? That was Abhinav Bindra. Who was the person who got first individual medal? KD Jadhav. Who was the first Indian woman boxer to win an Olympic medal? Mary Kom. And the first Olympic gold in athletics for India was actually brought by Neeraj Chopra in the javelin. ठीक है, where he won silver. ठीक है. These are the pride of India in the year of 2024. Manu Bhekar, bronze, ठीक है, in pistol shooting. Then Manu Bhekar and Sarabjot Singh in pistol shooting, another bronze. Swapnil, who got bronze in the rifle shooting. Indian hockey team, which also secured a bronze. Neeraj Chopra, who secured a silver, and bronze, which was secured by Aman Sherawat in wrestling. Keep some important facts in your mind. Just have a go through at them. Important for prelims, and we move forward to the next news, where we'll quickly try to ascertain ourselves with some very important facts related to a crop which has been in the news. The name of the crop is coffee, which you guys might be sipping right now, attending this boring lecture, right? So some 300 containers of India's coffee export to the West Asian markets are now stranded at ports or slowly moving via the Strait of Hormuz, the reason of the conflict, throwing the coffee exporters into a sea of uncertainty and cost escalation as the US-Israeli war on Iran constrained passage through the Strait of Hormuz. First and foremost, the crop of coffee. The crop of coffee, which was being grown at that point of a time in the region of Arab, but there was no knowledge about it in the region of India. Then in 17th century, there came a Sufi saint, Baba Budan. Baba Budan basically went for Hajj and kind of very secretively imported 7 beans of coffee and started growing them in the region of Karnataka at a place called as Budangiri Hills. Baba Budan. So he basically brought those seeds or secretively imported those seeds from Mokha in Yemen and started growing them to the region of Mysore. Okay. Coffee, which is a perennial crop, so it is grown in almost all the seasons, so it can be considered as Kharif as well as Rabi. The soil which is required for the growth of coffee is a well-drained soil which is rich in organic matter and slightly acidic. It requires high humidity also. So it requires 2 important showers. If UPSC asks you, blossom shower and backing shower is related to which of the following crop? It is coffee. Remember that it also requires the shade-grown conditions to actually be protected directly from the sunlight. Okay. When we talk about the coffee production and export in our country, which state is the highest producer? Karnataka, which actually produces more than 2/3 of the coffee crop, followed by Kerala and Tamil Nadu. What is India's share in the global production? Not that much, 4.5%, but we are the 7th largest producer. So who is the largest producer of coffee in the world? Brazil, followed by Vietnam, then Colombia, and then Indonesia. Remember, 80% of the coffee which we produce is actually exported, and 20%, almost 1/4 of our total export share of coffee is actually directed towards Italy. Why we are exporting so much of coffee? Because we drink tea also. Okay. There are 2 kinds of people, one who drink tea and one who are not good. Second, 2 well-known species of coffee is Arabica and Robusta. Keep this in mind that this growing of coffee is very important because it employs almost 2.5 lakh small farmers of our country. If UPSC asks you about the Coffee Board of India, remember, it is an autonomous organization, works under the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. The head office or headquarter at Bangalore, created during the time period of the British rule. So after that, there is no specific act which has been created for the Coffee Board. It is Coffee 7 Act of 1942. For what? For promotion of sale and consumption of coffee in India and abroad. Keep these facts in your mind and we move forward to the next news, where there is a panel. The panel is a Standing Committee on Agriculture, Animal Husbandry and Food Processing, which has basically recommended that how the government shall take steps to actually protect the farmers against the cheap edible oil imports. So what does the news says? The news says that noting that our country import more than half, 56% of our edible oil needs, the committee has basically recommended to protect the farmer from these cheap imports, and thus for that purpose the government should devise such a mechanism wherein import duties on these edible oils, they get a dynamically adjusted based on the domestic production level. So for example, let's say if the domestic production of edible oil is increasing, then such import duty shall also increase. So we can basically kind of disincentivize the import of edible oil, and that will lead for our Indian consumers to buy the kind of a domestic produced edible oil. That is the idea which is being suggested here. Why India is import dependent when it comes to edible oil? So keep this in mind that it is actually quite ironical that our country, as per the Niti Aayog, is actually the largest, or we rank first in the production of rice bran oil, castor seed oil, safflower, sesame oil, etc., even the Niger oil. But, and we also kind of include 15 to 20% of the global oil seed area and 6 to 7% of the total oil production. However, keep this in mind that we also accounts for 9 to 10% of the total consumption of edible oil in the world as well. So the production is only 6 to 7% of total oil production in the world, but the consumption is almost 3 to 4% extra. So this 3 to 4% extra is something which we start importing from the region of Malaysia and Indonesia. Also, such kind of a deficit takes place. Why? Because there is an increasing propensity to consume, the rising population and the higher income level, as well as the government has basically kind of focused upon more consumer centric policies. So the moment the demand starts increasing, instead of actually putting impetus on the increasing the production, the government actually starts reducing down the import tariffs. Also, limited domestic growth. So even, for example, yes, we do have idle condition in the tropical belt, but not as much idle condition for crop yield as it exists in the region of Malaysia and Indonesia. And that is the reason that, let's say, for example, if we are growing 100% in 100% region, and we are basically kind of envisaging a production of 1 kg, the total yield hovers around 60% of that only, 600 grams only. That is the issue. Okay? So because of this, we are basically import dependent for 56% of our edible oil need. And to tackle this issue, the government basically came up with a national mission on edible oil, which was launched in 2021 under Ministry of Agriculture. And remember, it's a centrally sponsored scheme where the government is trying to increase the domestic production of edible oils to 25 million tons by 2030 and to bring further 6.5 lakh hectare of land under palm plantation. Okay? Also, expanding the oil seed cultivation by 40 lakh hectare. By doing what? By better utilization of rice and potato fallow lands, as well as to promote the intercropping. This is a data which has been provided to us by the PIB as latest as August 2024. Where just look at our ranking in the edible oil. First in rice bran, castor seed, safflower. Second in cotton seed, groundnut seed. Third when it comes to coconut and sesame. Fourth in rapeseed. Fifth in soya bean and linseed. So just remember these facts and we move forward to the last news of the day, where recently a new butterfly species has been discovered in the region of Arunachal Pradesh, and that butterfly has actually been named on a very prominent personality which passed away recently. So this new species of butterfly, which is recorded in the forest of Arunachal Pradesh, Leprada district, has been named after the musician Zubeengargi, a cultural icon of Assam, whose death on September 19 actually triggered a storm. Remember that it was discovered by the people and the researchers who are working for the Travancore Natural History Society, who basically proposed this Basar Duke as the common name for Euthalia Zubeengargi. So if UPSC basically gives you this term and asks you that what does this stands for, you know that it is basically a butterfly. Some other important species which were very recently in the news for your prelims. One is your dhole, the Asiatic wild dog. Why? Because it has made a kind of a comeback in the region of Kaziranga National Park. Remember, it is found also in the eastern and the western Ghats, Assam and Meghalaya. And in IUCN, it has been basically listed as endangered. Then, if UPSC gives you, let's say, some very prominent statements like, which of the following is India's only exclusive plant-eating marine mammal? That is dugong. Why in the news? Because India's first dugong conservation reserve has been opened in Park Bay, and remember, dugong is a vulnerable species. Then Indian soft-shell turtle. Why in the news? Because it is only seen in the waters of Ganga basin and it is listed as endangered also. Indus River dolphin, also called as Bhulan, which is Punjab's state aquatic animal. In India, it is found only in Bias River. So remember all of these onlys also. It can act as an exception in your prelims examination and listed as endangered. So with this, we have reached to the end of our discussion today. Do not forget to attempt the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation and thank you.